They thought their dream home was a fresh start until their dog tried to drag their child away from the basement. The basement door flew open with a bang. 6-year-old Alexis's scream pierced the Saturday morning quiet, followed by the sound of frantic scrambling. Alberto Bryant dropped his coffee mug, barely registering the hot liquid splashing across the kitchen floor as he bolted toward his son's cries. He rounded the corner to find Marlin, their German shepherd, with the back of Alexis's shirt clamped firmly in his jaws, dragging the boy backward across the hallway floor. The dog's amber eyes were wide, alert, not with aggression, but with something Alberto would later recognize as pure terror. "Marlin, release!" Alberto commanded, his voice sharp with authority. The dog didn't budge, a low whine building in his throat as he continued pulling Alexis away from the basement entrance. This wasn't the first time. For weeks now, Marlin had appointed himself guardian of that door, his behavior growing increasingly desperate each time Alexis approached it. That night, Alberto woke to find Marlin standing rigid beside their bed, staring at him with unnerving intensity. The dog's nostrils flared, catching something in the air that human senses couldn't detect. "That dog knows something we don't," Alberto whispered to his wife. "And God help us when we find out what it is." Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. The Coopers hadn't always been a family of 4. 3 years ago, they'd been 3, Frank, Clara, and little Alexis, then just a toddler, learning to string words together. They'd driven to Barton County Animal Shelter just to look, as Carlos Bryant had insisted. Albert remembered the exact moment they'd first seen Marlin, sitting apart from the other dogs, his posture dignified despite the cramped kennel. There was something in those amber eyes, a knowing depth that seemed to look right through them. "That one," Alexis had said, pointing with chubby fingers. It was the first and last dog they considered. Alberto Bryant, at 38, carried himself with the straight-back discipline of his military years. After 2 tours overseas, he'd traded his uniform for construction blueprints, becoming a respected foreman known for running tight schedules and safer than required job sites. Practical to a fault, Alberto believed in what he could see, touch, and measure. The inexplicable made him uncomfortable. Carlos Bryant was his counterbalance. A second-grade teacher at Millfield Elementary, she possessed the patient intuition that came from years of interpreting children's needs when they lacked the words to express them. Where Alberto saw problems to solve, Carlos Bryant saw stories waiting to unfold. Their differences had nearly broken them once, early in their marriage, but now they were the bedrock of their partnership. Their colonial-style home in rural Pennsylvania had been a dream realized just 6 months ago, the product of careful saving and Frank's contractor connections. Built in the 1930s, it had character Carlos Bryant loved and solid bones Alberto appreciated. The previous owners had renovated extensively, modernizing while maintaining vintage charm. The unfinished basement was the last frontier, waiting for Frank's promised renovations. Someday, Millfield was the kind of town where the grocery clerk remembered your usual purchases, where summer meant community picnics at the lake, and where neighbors still brought casseroles when someone was sick. It was precisely the place Alberto and Carlos Bryant had wanted for raising Alexis. Safe, predictable, rooted in tradition. Until Marlin's behavior shattered that sense of security. "It's not like him," Carlos Bryant had told her mother on the phone the previous evening. "Marlin's always been so gentle with Alexis, this guarding behavior, like he's possessed." What they didn't yet understand was that Marlin's behavior wasn't new. It was ancient instinct, honed through thousands of years of canine evolution, then refined through the specific tragic history Marlin carried silently within him. A history they were about to discover, one terrifying piece at a time. The morning after Marlin had dragged Alexis from the basement doorway, for the 3rd time that week, Carlos Bryant sat at the kitchen table with her laptop open, scrolling through pet behavior forums while Alberto made breakfast. Alexis sat cross-legged on the living room floor, building a tower of blocks with careful concentration. Marlin lay nearby, his eyes never leaving the boy. "Listen to this," Carlos Bryant said, adjusting her reading glasses. "Resource guarding can sometimes extend to areas of the home. If your dog is preventing access to a specific location, there may be something there they're protecting, or protecting you from." She looked up at Frank. "What if he's trying to tell us something?" Alberto flipped a pancake. with more force than necessary. "He's a dog, Clara, not Lassie. Dogs get fixations. Remember how he wouldn't go near the garden shed last summer? That was because of the skunk living under it," Carlos Bryant reminded him. And he was right, Alberto sighed, sliding pancakes onto a plate. "I'll take a look at the basement this weekend. Maybe there's a mouse nest or something." Marlin's head lifted suddenly, ears perked toward the basement door, a low whine building in his throat. "See?" Carlos Bryant whispered. "He knows we're talking about it." Alberto shook his head, unwilling to admit how unsettled he felt by the dog's apparent comprehension. That afternoon, Carlos Bryant attempted to work with Marlin, using treats and gentle encouragement to coax him near the basement door. The German Shepherd would take a few hesitant steps forward, then freeze, his entire body rigid with tension. "It's okay, boy," she soothed, offering a piece of chicken. "See? Nothing scary down there?" Marlin wouldn't budge, his eyes fixed on the door with such intensity that Carlos Bryant felt a chill run down her spine, despite the warm June air. When she reached for the doorknob herself, Marlin darted forward, placing his body between her and the door, his warm weight pressing against her legs until she stepped back. "All right," she conceded. "You win for now." By Friday evening, the situation had escalated. Marlin had taken to sleeping directly in front of the basement door, waking with a start at the slightest sound from below. Alberto found himself awake at 3 a.m., listening to the dog's nails clicking on the hardwood as he paced the hallway. "This can't go on," he told Carlos Bryant over coffee the next morning. "I'm calling that trainer again." The opportunity to host the neighborhood's monthly potluck came that evening, bringing welcome distraction. As twilight settled over their backyard, neighbors gathered around patio tables laden with casseroles and salads. Marlin, normally social, remained vigilant near the back door, where he could monitor both Alexis and the entrance to the house. "Your dog seems on edge," observed Jim Wilkins, their next-door neighbor, a retired electrician who'd lived in Millfield his entire life. "Everything okay with him?" Alberto explained Marlin's strange behavior while serving himself potato salad. "It's just the basement door. Won't let anyone near it. Been going on for weeks now." Jim's weathered face creased with concern. "Basement, huh? Previous owners did a lot of work down there themselves. Always seemed a bit sketchy to me. Howard wasn't exactly handy, if you know what I mean. Cut corners whenever he could." "What kind of work?" Alberto asked, his contractor instincts piqued. "Bit of everything. Redid some plumbing, moved a wall or two, installed a new water heater," Jim said, taking a sip of his beer. "I offered to help. Told him some of that work needed permits and inspections. He wasn't interested in my 2 cents. Alberto felt Clara's eyes on him from across the yard, her expression clearly saying, "I told you so." The party wound down around 9, and after cleaning up and putting Alexis to bed, Alberto found himself standing before the basement door, Marlin at his side. They thought the danger had passed, but Marlin wasn't done warning them yet. Trembling slightly, Marlin pressed his nose to the crack beneath the basement door. "What is it, boy?" Alberto murmured. "What's got you so worked up?" The dog whined again, more insistent this time. Frank's hand hovered over the doorknob. Something in Marlin's behavior had finally broken through his skepticism. This wasn't normal dog anxiety, this was communication. "I'm going down there tomorrow," he told Carlos Bryant as they got ready for bed. "First thing in the morning. I want you and Alexis to go to your mother's for a few hours while I check things out." Carlos Bryant nodded, relief visible in her eyes. "Thank you for taking this seriously." "I'm not saying there's anything to find," Alberto cautioned, but Jim's comment about the DIY work, "I want to make sure everything's up to code." The following morning dawned clear and bright, belying the tension that had settled over the Cooper household. Carlos Bryant packed an overnight bag, just in case, she insisted, and loaded Alexis into the car after breakfast. "Be careful," she told Frank, kissing him goodbye, "and call me the minute you find anything." "It's probably nothing," Alberto repeated, but the conviction had drained from his voice. After they left, Alberto stood in the silent house, Marlin beside him, both staring at the basement door. "All right, boy," he said finally. "Let's see what's got you so worried." The basement stairs creaked under Frank's weight as he descended, flashlight in hand. Marlin followed reluctantly, every muscle in his body tense, his breathing shallow and rapid. The unfinished space was cool and dimly lit by 2 small windows set high in the concrete walls. Cardboard boxes of Christmas decorations lined one wall, while Clara's abandoned exercise equipment gathered dust in a corner. Alberto scanned the room systematically, looking for anything unusual: water damage, mold, signs of pests. Marlin moved straight to the far wall near the water heater, sniffing intently at a section of drywall that looked newer than the rest. The dog pawed at the wall, then looked back at Frank, whining. Alberto ran his hand along the surface, feeling a slight warmth that shouldn't have been there. He knocked lightly. Hollow. Leaning closer, he caught it, a faint odor, slightly sweet but chemical. His contractor instincts kicked in. He rushed upstairs for his tools, then returned to carefully cut a small inspection hole in the drywall. What he found made his blood run cold. A gas pipe with a visible crack, improperly installed and concealed behind the wall. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, immediately pulling out his phone to call the gas company. Within 30 minutes, utility trucks lined the street outside the Cooper home. The gas had been shut off, windows opened, and a technician in safety gear was examining the compromised pipe. "You're lucky to be alive," the technician said bluntly. As he emerged from the basement, this leak was slow but steady. In another few weeks, the concentration would have reached dangerous levels. One spark and... He left the sentence unfinished, but his grim expression said everything. Alberto sank into a kitchen chair, suddenly aware of how close they'd come to disaster. Marlin sat beside him, no longer trembling. His mission accomplished. "How did you know?" Alberto whispered, burying his fingers in the dog's thick fur. "How the hell did you know?" That evening, with the gas leak repaired and the house deemed safe, Alberto sat on the back porch, steps nursing a beer. The night air carried the sweet scent of neighbor Jim's gardenias, a stark contrast to the chemical odor that had permeated their home just hours earlier. Marlin lay at his feet, seemingly relaxed for the first time in weeks, occasionally sighing contentedly when Alberto absently scratched behind his ears. "You saved us," Alberto murmured, still processing the day's events. "How'd you know that pipe was leaking?" Carlos Bryant stepped onto the porch, carrying her tablet. The soft glow illuminated her face as she lowered herself beside Frank. "I've been doing some research," she said, her voice hushed so as not to wake Alexis, who had finally fallen asleep after the day's excitement, "about Marlin's adoption records." "What brought this on?" Alberto asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Gas leaks are odorless to humans, Frank. The gas company adds that rotten egg smell artificially, but Marlin detected it through the wall before it built up enough for us to notice." She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I just wondered if maybe he's done this before." Alberto finished the thought. "If maybe he was trained for it." Carlos Bryant nodded, swiping through screens on her tablet. "I emailed the shelter, asked if they had any background information they hadn't shared with us. I thought maybe he'd been trained as some kind of detection dog. The director called me back personally." Clara's voice wavered slightly. "Frank, Marlin isn't even his real name." Frank's hand stilled on Marlin's head. The dog looked up at him with those knowing amber eyes. When he came to the shelter, his microchip identified him as Sarge. Carlos Bryant turned the tablet toward Frank, showing a scanned document. He belonged to a man named William Taggart, a mine foreman from West Virginia. Alberto took the tablet, scanning the intake form from Barton County Animal Shelter. The photograph showed a thinner, more haggard version of their dog, his expression somehow lost. "There's more," Carlos Bryant continued. "The director remembered this case specifically because it was unusual. Marlin Sarge was surrendered by Mr. Taggart's sister after his death. Apparently he was some kind of unofficial mine safety dog. He could detect gas pockets before their equipment could." Alberto felt a chill, despite the warm evening. "That explains the gas liner. There was a note in his file cautioning that he might have issues with enclosed spaces or certain chemical smells. They thought he'd been traumatized during a mining accident." Marlin shifted, pressing closer against Frank's leg, as if seeking reassurance. "Does it say what happened to his owner, this Taggart guy?" Carlos Bryant nodded, her eyes glistening in the porch light. "Respiratory failure, following a mine collapse. Sarge was with him when he died." Alberto set down his beer, suddenly understanding the depth of what they were dealing with. This wasn't just a dog's instinct, this was learned behavior, born from tragedy. "The shelter has contact information for Eleanor Taggart, William's sister," Carlos Bryant said. "I thought maybe we should call her, find out more about Marlin's past." Alberta nodded slowly. Tomorrow, we'll call tomorrow. That night, for the first time in weeks, Marlin slept at the foot of their bed rather than guarding the basement door. The immediate danger had passed, but Alberto lay awake, turning over the day's revelations. He'd always prided himself on his practical nature, his ability to see the world in concrete terms of problems and solutions. But there was something about Marlin, Sarge, that challenged his worldview. How had the dog known? Was it simply his heightened sense of smell, or was there something more? The following morning, after breakfast, Carlos Bryant called the number for Eleanor Taggart while Alberto took Alexis and Marlin for a walk around the neighborhood. When they returned, Clara's eyes were red-rimmed from crying. She remembered him instantly, Carlos Bryant said once Alexis was occupied with his toys in the next room. Started crying when I described him. Said she'd wondered for years what happened to him after she had to give him up. What did she tell you? Enough to know there's much more to Marlin's story than we realized. Carlos Bryant sank onto the couch. William, she called him Bill, was a safety foreman at Blue Ridge Mining. He'd had Marlin since he was a puppy, trained him himself. The dog went everywhere with him, especially to work. Alberto sat beside her, processing the information. And he used the dog to detect gas. Apparently, Sarge could smell dangerous gas concentrations before their equipment registered them. Bill would take him through the tunnels each morning before sending in his crews. If Sarge refused to enter a section, Bill would order additional testing. Clara's voice softened. She said her brother saved countless lives because he trusted that dog's nose more than any machine. Alberto glanced toward the living room, where Marlin lay beside Alexis, vigilant even during playtime. What happened to Bill? He asked. Clara's expression clouded. There was a collapse in 2018. Bill and 7 miners were trapped. When rescuers finally reached them, after almost 3 days, they'd been exposed to dangerously high levels of methane. 3 died in the hospital afterward, including Bill. And Marlin was there during the collapse? He was above ground. But Eleanor said when they brought Bill up, Marlin wouldn't leave his side. Not during the ambulance ride, not at the hospital. When Bill died, Clara's voice faltered. Marlin apparently howled once, then went completely silent. She said he hasn't made a sound since. Alberto realized with a start that they'd never heard Marlin bark. Not once in the 3 years they'd had him. He'd assumed the dog was just naturally quiet. Eleanor is driving down next weekend, Carlos Bryant added. She wants to see Marlin again, and she has some of Bill's things. She thought they might comfort him. Is that okay? Alberto nodded, watching as Alexis carefully balanced a block on Marlin's patient nose. Of course, that night Alexis woke screaming from a nightmare. Something about the man in the basement. While Carlos Bryant soothed him back to sleep, Alberto found himself drawn to the basement door. Despite the repair, despite the all-clear from the utility company, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something. Marlin appeared beside him, posture alert, but not distressed, as it had been before. The dog nudged Frank's hand, then turned to look back toward Alexis's room. "What is it, boy?" Alberto whispered. "What else are you trying to tell us?" Over the next few days, a new tension settled over the Cooper household. Though Marlin no longer blocked the basement door, he still performed what Alberto had come to think of as inspections, methodically sniffing around appliances, walls, and doorways several times a day. Occasionally, he would stop and stare at a section of wall with unsettling intensity before moving on. Alberto found himself caught between his rational mind, which insisted the danger had been identified and eliminated, and a growing intuition that there was more to Marlin's behavior than they yet understood. When he shared these thoughts with Clara, she didn't dismiss them. "Eleanor said something interesting on the phone," she told him. "She said Bill always claimed that Sarge didn't just smell gas. He sensed danger, like he had some kind of sixth sense about when something wasn't right." Alberto would have scoffed at such a notion 3 weeks ago. But now, watching Marlin methodically patrol their home each evening, he wasn't so sure. "I think," Carlos Bryant said carefully one night as they watched Marlin circle the perimeter of the living room for the 3rd time, "that we were meant to find Marlin. Or maybe he was meant to find us." Alberto had no answer for that. Instead, he began his own investigation. He started searching online, articles about mining accidents in West Virginia, old Union records, obscure forums. He typed in William Taggart, then gas detection dogs, then dog saves miners. What he found would change everything he thought he knew about the animals sleeping beside his son's bed each night. Eleanor Taggart arrived on a sun-drenched Saturday morning, her ancient Buick kicking up a cloud of dust as it crawled up the Cooper driveway. Alberto stood on the porch as the driver's side door opened and a woman in her late 60s stepped out. Her movements were deliberate but graceful. She wore a simple floral dress and practical shoes. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun. Even from a distance, Alberto could see the resemblance: sharp cheekbones, a watchful gaze, and something piercing in her posture that reminded him of old photographs of soldiers returning home. Inside the house, Marlin had been pacing from window to window all morning, his nails tapping against the hardwood like a metronome. When the car door slammed shut, he froze, ears up, nose twitching. A soft whine escaped his throat. The first sound Alberto had heard from the dog since the gas leak. "She's here!" Alberto called over his shoulder to Clara, who was helping Alexis put away breakfast dishes. Marlin bolted to the front door, his entire body quivering. Not with fear, Albert understood that now, but with anticipation. Carlos Bryant joined him on the porch, Alexis peeking shyly from behind her legs. "You must be Eleanor," Carlos Bryant said warmly, stepping forward with an outstretched hand. "Thank you so much for coming." Eleanor took her hand, but her gaze had already moved past her to the trembling German shepherd in the doorway. "My stars," she whispered, her voice catching. "Would you look at that?" He remembers. Marlin took a hesitant step forward, then another. His nose worked furiously, tracking her scent through the air. Eleanor lowered herself to one knee, the movement careful, stiff with arthritis. "Hey there, old partner," she murmured, her Appalachian drawl thickening. "You remember your Auntie Ellie, don't you?" The change in Marlin was instant and profound. The dignified, stoic dog the Coopers had known for 3 years dissolved before their eyes. He bounded forward, closing the distance in seconds, pressing his body against Eleanor's chest. His tail swept in wide, joyful arcs. A sound emerged from deep in his chest, part whine, part howl, but charged with something ancient and emotional that made Frank's throat tighten. Eleanor buried her face in Marlin's scruff, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. "Oh, Sarge," she whispered, "look at you, boy. Billy would be so proud." For several moments, the Coopers stood silently, bearing witness to the reunion. Alexis watched, wide-eyed, clutching Clara's hand. Finally, Eleanor stood, wiping her eyes with a handkerchief she'd pulled from her pocket. "Forgive me," she said, voice steadier now. "It's been 5 years since I had to give him up. Never thought I'd see him again." "Please," Carlos Bryant said gently. "Come inside. We have coffee ready. We'd love to hear about Marlin." About Sarge. Marlin stayed glued to Eleanor's leg as they walked into the house, as if afraid she might vanish if he lost contact. In the living room, she settled onto the couch. Marlin immediately lay at her feet, resting his chin on her sensible shoes. "He looks good," she said, surveying him with a critical but loving eye. "Healthy, happy. Billy would be pleased. We've tried to take good care of him," Alberto said as Carlos Bryant handed him a mug of coffee. "Though I'm starting to think he's been the one taking care of ours." Eleanor met his gaze, sharp as a hawk's. "He told you about the gas, didn't he? That's why you contacted the shelter." Alberto blinked. "How did you know?" "Because that's what he was trained to do." She sipped her coffee. Billy worked the mines for 32 years, started as a digger, worked his way up to safety foreman. He knew every creak, every smell, every shadow that meant something was wrong. But even he couldn't smell methane or carbon monoxide. That's where Sarge came in. Over the next hour, Eleanor unraveled the story of William Taggart and his extraordinary dog. Billy had raised Sarge from an 8-week-old pup. At first, the dog was simply company, something to come home to after long shifts and longer evenings following his divorce. When the mine extended Billy's hours, he started bringing Sarge with him rather than leave him alone. The first time Sarge saved lives had been a fluke. Billy was leading a crew into the North Tunnel, Eleanor said, and Sarge just planted himself. Wouldn't move, kept tugging at Billy's pant leg, trying to get him to turn back. Billy, already known for his caution, trusted his gut. He pulled the men back and ordered additional testing. The instruments confirmed what the dog had already sensed, a hidden methane pocket. That gas could have killed them all, she said. After that, Billy started training Sarge properly. Used samples, created responses. The company never officially endorsed it, liability and all that, but everyone knew if Sarge wouldn't go in, neither would the men. Alberto leaned forward. So he's actually trained to detect gas leaks. That's why he wouldn't let us near the basement. Eleanor nodded. But it wasn't just gas. Billy swore Sarge could sense structural weaknesses, water seepage, bad vibrations, anything out of the ordinary. Her voice softened. There was a kid once, just 19, reminded Billy of his grandson. He didn't listen, thought Sarge was just superstition. She fell silent. What happened? Carlos Bryant asked gently. The tunnel collapsed, Eleanor said quietly. They couldn't reach him in time. Her hand moved slowly, comfortingly over Marlin's fur. After that, the miners started listening. Alexis, who'd been stacking blocks nearby, suddenly looked up. Is that why Marlin doesn't like the basement? He asked. Because it might fall down? The adults exchanged glances. Clara's was concerned. Frank's thoughtful. Could be, Eleanor said seriously. Sarge, Marlin, he notices things we don't. Alberto recalled what Jim Wilkins had said about the previous owner's DIY renovations. The gas leak was fixed, but maybe there was still something else. Eleanor reached into the bag she'd brought and pulled out a faded blue bandana. Billy wore this every day in the mines, said it was his good luck charm. She held it out. Marlin sniffed it deeply, then let out that same strange vocalization, a soft, aching sound, half whine, half howling memory. He hasn't made a sound in 5 years, Eleanor said, her voice thick. Not since Billy passed. He didn't with us either, Carlos Bryant added, not until the gas leak. Eleanor nodded like something had just been confirmed. Trauma affects dogs just like it does people. After Billy died, Sarge just shut down, stopped eating, stopped making sounds. I tried to keep him, but my apartment didn't allow pets, and I couldn't afford the vet bills. Her eyes clouded with remembered pain. Giving him up was the hardest thing I've ever done. Felt like betraying Billy all over again. You didn't betray anyone, Carlos Bryant said softly, reaching out to squeeze her hand. You gave Marlin a second chance. And apparently, he's given us one too. As the afternoon melted into evening, Eleanor shared more stories, newspaper clippings, plastic sleeves filled with old safety award photos, and one article that made Alberto go still. It was about the collapse. According to the report, the rescue team had no way to locate the trapped miners until Sarge, who had been above ground, broke free and led them to an old, sealed ventilation shaft. He led them straight to the 8 men, Eleanor said. They were all alive when found, but they'd been breathing bad air too long. 3 died later in the hospital. Billy was one of them. Alberto swallowed. Marlin was there during the rescue. Eleanor nodded. He wouldn't leave Billy's side, even in the hospital. Nurses said he placed his head on Billy's chest, listening. He knew when Billy's breathing changed before the machines did. She paused. Billy's last words? Her voice cracked. He said, he knows before we do. Always listen when he's trying to tell you something. The words settled into the quiet room like dust. Would you stay for dinner? Carlos Bryant asked gently. We'd love to hear more about your brother and about Sarge. Eleanor smiled. I'd like that. As Carlos Bryant began preparing pot roast and vegetables, Alberto found himself once again staring at the basement door. Marlin stood nearby, watching, not blocking, waiting. Alberto reached out and rested his hand on the doorknob. What else is down there, boy? He whispered. What are you trying to tell me? Marlin whined softly, pressing against his leg, not to stop him, but almost as if offering support. I think he wants you to look, Eleanor said, stepping into the hall. Billy always said Sarge never gave warnings without reason. Alberto nodded. After dinner, I'm going to do a more thorough inspection. We must have missed something. As they ate, Eleanor shared how Billy trained Sarge using custom commands. He never used common words, said dogs paid more attention to odd phrases. Instead of watch, he'd say vigilant. Said it snapped the dog to focus. Clara's eyebrows lifted. She and Alberto exchanged a look. They'd always wondered why Marlin responded to strange vocabulary. Later, as they cleared dishes, Alexis tugged on Eleanor's dress. Marlin talks to me sometimes, he said, matter of fact. The room went quiet. Carlos Bryant looked at her son, concerned. Not with his mouth, Alexis added, as if clarifying for confused grown-ups. In my head, he tells me things. Eleanor knelt, her face serious, not dismissive. What does he tell you, young man? Alexis didn't hesitate. He says there's a man in the basement, a man who can't breathe. A chill crept through the kitchen. Alberto looked at Clara. Her face had gone pale. Alexis has been having nightmares, she explained softly, about someone in the basement who can't breathe. We thought it was just the gas leak, maybe just fear. Eleanor's expression turned thoughtful. Children and animals see things differently than we do, more directly, without all our filters. She looked back at Alexis. Has Marlin told you anything else? Alexis nodded solemnly.
He says the man got stuck and couldn't get out, like Marlin's first daddy. Alexis had whispered before bedtime. The hair on Frank's arm stood on end. They had never told Alexis about Marlin's past, about the mine collapse, about Billy Tager. And yet, somehow, he knew. I think, Eleanor said slowly, her voice low and certain, you folks might want to take a much closer look at that basement. That night, after tucking Alexis into bed with soft assurances that Marlin would stay close and keep him safe, Alberto grabbed his flashlight and toolbox. Carlos, Bryant, and Eleanor followed him down the hall. Marlin padded silently at his side, no longer tense, just focused. I'll be thorough this time, Alberto promised. If there's anything else down there, I'll find it. He descended the stairs, flashlight beam cutting through the dimness. Marlin followed without hesitation, so unlike his earlier reluctance. The dog moved with confidence now, leading Alberto to the far corner of the basement, past the spot where they discovered the gas leak. Alberto stopped. The foundation wall showed signs of amateur repair. Newer concrete mixed with old, the color just slightly off. Before, Alberto had chalked it up to natural settling. Now, it felt like something more deliberate. Marlin pawed at the floor near the wall, then looked up at Frank, ears alert, tail still. What is it, boy? Alberto murmured. Crouching beside him, he ran his hands along the wall near the baseboard, fingers brushing over a faint draft, barely there, but unmistakable. He angled the flashlight toward the seam where wall met floor. There, tucked within thin cracks, was a glimmer of moisture. Something wasn't right. Clara, he called upstairs, bring me the pry bar from my toolbox. As he waited, Alberto tapped along the wall, listening for variations in sound. Hollow, solid, hollow again. Marlin stayed at his side, quiet but alert, sniffing occasionally at the concrete. Carlos Bryant appeared moments later, breathless, handing over the tool. Eleanor followed close behind, watching everything with narrowed eyes. What did you find? Carlos Bryant asked. Not sure yet, Alberto muttered, but something's off. He wedged the pry bar into the seam where old met new and applied pressure. With a crack and crumble, a chunk of the concrete gave way. Dust puffed into the air. Behind it, an opening. Small, dark. There's a space back here, Alberto said, leaning in. This doesn't match anything on the blueprints. Eleanor stepped closer, peering over his shoulder. Could be an old coal chute. A lot of these houses had them. Alberto shook his head, widening the hole. Wrong side of the house. Plus, this place has always used oil heat, with more concrete broken away. The hole grew large enough for his flashlight to penetrate. The beam cut into the darkness and hit something unexpected. There's a room back here, Alberto breathed. A hidden chamber. It was small, maybe 8 feet square. Dirt floor, rough stone walls. A strange, enclosed space that shouldn't exist. His light caught something metallic in the far corner. Tools? A rusted bucket? Long abandoned objects, half buried in shadow. The previous owners must have sealed this off during their renovations, Alberto said, voice tight. But why hide it? Marlin whined low and pawed at the edge of the opening. Be careful, Carlos Bryant warned, her voice tense. You don't know what's in there. I will, Alberto promised. His curiosity, sharpened by years of construction work, was now fully engaged. A hidden void like this could cause serious structural issues, especially during the rainy season. He worked the hole wider, just enough for someone to crawl through. Eleanor laid a hand gently on his arm. Billy always said, send Sergeant first. If he comes back in distress, you don't go in. Alberto nodded. Marlin, he said, firm and clear, vigilant. The German shepherd's ears perked. He understood. With no hesitation, he slid through the opening and disappeared into the darkness. The only sounds were his claws against dirt and stone. Moments later, Marlin reemerged, calm, composed, no signs of distress. Looks safe, Alberto said. Let's see what this house has been hiding. Alberto squeezed through the narrow gap. The air inside was damp and still, thick with age. The smell of dirt, old wood, and mildew filled his nostrils. His flashlight revealed a room. Crude stone walls older than the house itself. A dirt floor packed but uneven and remnant of something more recent in the far corner. A lantern, empty food wrappers, a stained mattress, a stack of notebooks. Clara's voice echoed from the basement, tight with concern. Frank, what do you see? It's like a root cellar, he called back. But someone's been living here. Recently, Marlin sniffed methodically around the perimeter, working like a trained investigator, not a pet. Carlos Bryant crawled to the gap beside him, gasping as her light joined his. This is Frank, this is disturbing. Who had access to our basement? Albert Todd didn't answer. He'd stepped toward the notebooks. He picked up the top one and opened it. Inside, handwritten notes in spidery scrawl. Pages filled with sketches of the house. Their house. Diagrams, entries, dates, movement schedules, routines, where they slept, what time Alexis went to school. Clara. Alberto said, voice clip, call the police. Now. Carlos Bryant turned and scrambled for the stairs, flashlight bouncing. Eleanor peered through the opening, her weathered face going pale. Land's sakes, she whispered. What have you stumbled into? Marlin had stopped at the mattress. He stood rigid, ears up, head tilted. Alberto moved closer. Marlin pawed urgently at a spot beside the mattress. The dirt there looked off, looser. Alberto set down his flashlight and knelt. His fingers brushed over the dirt, soft, recently disturbed. He started digging. Marlin joined him, paws working with purpose. 6 inches down, Frank's fingers struck something solid, a metal handle. He cleared the dirt away, revealing a trapdoor. Eleanor, Alberto called. There's something under here. Eleanor squeezed through the hole, breath catching as she stepped forward. Be careful, she said. Billy always said Sard got jumpy around hidden spaces. Too many cave-ins. Too much bad memory. But Marlin showed no fear. Just a quiet, pressing intensity. The trap door was about 2 feet square, old but fitted with a surprisingly new padlock. Alberto stood. I need my bolt cutters. Whatever's down there, someone wanted it kept hidden. As he turned to retrieve his tools, thunder cracked above. A sudden downpour battered the basement windows. Eleanor glanced up. That sounds like a real gully washer. These old cellars weren't made for rain like that. By the time Alberto returned, water was already seeping through the walls. Puddles forming on the floor. The dirt around the trap door turned to mud, threatening to obscure their find. We need to move fast, Alberto said, positioning the cutters. Snap, the padlock broke free. He hesitated. He might be tampering with a crime scene. But Marlin pawed again, firm, insistent. Alberto lifted the trap door. It creaked open, hinges protesting. A narrow shaft yawned beneath it, descending into blackness. A wave of cold, musty air rose to meet them, thick with earth and something unidentifiable. Clara's voice rang from the main basement. Frank, the police are on their way. But Maple Street's flooding could be hours. As if to underscore her words, a low growl of thunder rattled the foundation. Water surged against the outer wall. Alberto turned, instincts flaring. The basement's flooding. We need to get upstairs. Say what we can. Eleanor backed toward the opening. What about this? She asked, nodding toward the shaft. Alberto paused. Torn. We'll come back to it, he said. Let's get Alexis upstairs. But Marlin didn't move. He stayed, planted firmly beside the open trapdoor, posture tense, eyes fixed on the dark below. Marlin, come, Alberto ordered, but Marlin refused. He senses something. Eleanor said quietly. Billy would never ignore that signal. Another crash of thunder. Then water, rushing into the basement, soaking the floor. Frank, Carlos Bryant called. Window wells overflowing. Frank's decision came fast. Eleanor, go with Clara. Get Alexis. Take anything important upstairs. I'm staying with you, Eleanor said firmly, her jaw set. The Taggart stubbornness had returned. No time to argue. Alberto grabbed the flashlight and angled it down the shaft. Embedded metal rungs lined the stone wall. This goes deep in the foundation, he muttered. Root cellar extension, maybe? Water continued to pool around their feet. Marlin whined once, then sat, watching Frank. I'm going down, Alberto said, just far enough to see what's there. Marlin, stay. This time, the dog obeyed, but his body remained taut, as if holding his breath. Alberto placed a foot on the first rung and began to descend into the darkness, into the secret hidden below their home, into the truth that had waited years to be found. Alberto descended feet first into the shaft, boots slipping slightly on the damp metal rungs. 1, 2, 3. He counted each step, his flashlight clenched between his teeth, his heart pounding. By the time his head dropped below floor level, he could see the shaft extended another 8 feet before it opened into a second chamber, smaller, but far more disturbing. His light swept across the space. A folding chair, a battery-powered lamp, and on the far wall, restraints. Thick, industrial-grade metal cuffs bolted directly into stone. Oh my God, Alberto muttered. The implications hitting like a hammer to the chest. This wasn't bad construction. This was concealment. Criminal concealment. Above him, Marlin let out a sharp, piercing bark. A warning so unlike the dog's usual quiet demeanor, it sent a jolt of alarm down Frank's spine. Thunder cracked overhead. A deafening boom rattled the beams, and something above gave way. A rush of noise followed, and the roar of water flooding into the shaft. Frank. Eleanor's voice echoed down. The opening, it's collapsing. Alberto turned back just in time to see debris crashing into the shaft. Water surged in behind it. He scrambled upward, but his foot slipped on a rusted rung, sending him crashing down 2 feet before he caught himself. Water now gushed down the shaft, filling the chamber below with terrifying speed. Get out, Eleanor. Alberto yelled over the noise. Get upstairs, now. Not without you, young man, came her stubborn reply. Marlin appeared again, head thrust into the shaft. He barked furiously, then vanished. Don't leave me, boy, Alberto muttered under his breath, his body slick with mud and fear. The The water had reached his waist. Frank! Clara's voice rang out, sharp and panicked. He looked up, but the gap above had narrowed. Stones had shifted, and only a sliver remained. He couldn't climb it unaided. Then, a miracle, Marlin reappeared, something clenched between his jaws. A rope. The dog dropped one end into the shaft and braced himself against the floor. Good boy. Alberto gasped, reaching out with trembling, numb fingers. He looped the rope around one arm, using it for leverage as he climbed. Inch by inch, he rose. His head broke the surface. Light air. But the chaos that greeted him was no less frightening. The hidden room was now a churning pool, and the opening in the foundation had mostly collapsed. Alberto spotted Clara's face through the rubble, eyes wide with desperation. Frank, she cried, the wall's giving way. We can't get to you. Alberto realized a horrifying truth. The shaft behind him was flooding fast. The exit ahead was crumbling. He was trapped, but Marlin wasn't done yet. The German shepherd abandoned the rope and raced to a section of the floor near the damaged wall. He began digging furiously, spraying mud and rock with each powerful stroke. He's found another way. Eleanor called. A tunnel. It must connect to the main basement. Albert Todd didn't hesitate. He dropped to his hands and knees and helped dig. A few feet in, they uncovered a narrow pipe, barely wide enough for a person to crawl through. Go, Marlin, Alberto shouted. The dog didn't wait. He squeezed in, disappearing into the dark. Seconds later, Alberto heard Clara's voice cry out in relief from the basement side. He's made it. Now Alberto had to follow. The tunnel was tighter than the first, the mud clinging to every inch of his body, with the water climbing to his chest. He forced himself in, wriggling forward on elbows and knees, his flashlight gripped between his teeth. Claustrophobia clawed at him. The pipe curved, twisted. He lost all sense of direction. His lungs screamed. His shoulders burned. The moldy air clogged his throat, just as darkness blurred the edge of his vision. Fresh air. Marlin's teeth found his collar, tugging him the last few feet until Alberto collapsed into the main basement, gasping, coughing, half drowned. Carlos Bryant and Eleanor were there. Carlos Bryant dropped to her knees beside him, pulling him upright. We need to get upstairs now, she said. The whole foundation's going. If we stay, it'll take us with it. Even through his daze, Alberto heard it. The groan of timber, the pop of nails, the scream of stressed stone. Marlin barked again and bolted for the stairs, glancing back. He's right, Eleanor said. We have to move. Alberto staggered to his feet, leaning on Clara. They made it 3 steps before Marlin froze. Ears stiff, gaze locked behind them. A new sound, a muffled cry. Alberto turned, his heart sinking. There's someone else down there, he whispered. In the chamber, a second desperate sob confirmed it. Clara's grip tightened around his arm. Frank, no, you barely made it out. Let the police handle this. Frank's voice cracked with urgency. They won't make it in time. That shaft's filling fast. Marlin stood between Alberto and the tunnel, body stiff. He doesn't want you to go, Eleanor said. He's warning you. But another cry came, louder now. Panicked. Frank's mind raced. If there's someone chained down there, they'll drown before help gets here. His decision was made. Clara, he said, take Eleanor. Get to Alexis. Get to the 2nd floor and call 911 again. Tell them someone's trapped. We found a victim. Then nodded. 10 minutes, she said. If you're not out by then, I'm coming back. Alberto turned back to Marlin. Okay, boy, you ready? Marlin didn't go back to the first tunnel. Instead, he trotted toward a different corner of the basement near the old furnace and began pawing at the floor. Alberto followed. There, beneath the utility shelf, was a narrow maintenance panel disguised by rust and age. Alberto slid the bolt and pulled it open, revealing a crawl space lined with cobwebs and decades of dust. Marlin dove in without hesitation. Alberto followed, belly to the cold concrete, pushing his flashlight ahead. The passage was tighter than anything before, the air thick, water sloshed at his elbows. But Marlin moved confidently, carving a path. After less than a minute, the space angled upward, and Alberto heard it. The crying, closer now, clearer, desperate. Marlin reached another panel and scratched wildly. Alberto positioned himself to shove. It gave way, and Alberto spilled into a narrow alcove. Water poured in from cracks overhead. It already reached his knees. He raised a flashlight. There, an opening into the flooded shaft, and clinging to the highest rung of the ladder, a young woman, soaked, terrified, chained. Help, she gasped. Please, I'm chained. Alberto surged forward, peering through the gap. Can you reach me? He asked, extending his hand. My ankle. It's chained to the ladder, she cried, flinching with pain. The realization hit Alberto like a freight train. She wasn't trapped by accident. She was imprisoned and left to die. I'm coming, he said, already calculating the angle and depth. Marlin had other ideas. Before Alberto could stop him, the dog leapt into the shaft, claws finding grip on the rungs. He crossed the submerged ladder with uncanny grace, pressing himself beside the girl. She immediately threw an arm around him, sobbing into his fur. Good boy, she whispered. Good. Marlin wasn't just offering comfort. He was anchoring Jessica above the rising water, giving her the strength to hang on while Alberto figured out how to free her. Alberto angled his flashlight toward the restraint and spotted the mechanism. A simple pin lock, not a modern padlock like the one he cut from the trapdoor, but something old-fashioned. Maybe, just maybe, he could bypass it. My bolt cutters are upstairs, he muttered, calculating rapidly. Then, boom, another thunderous crack split the air. A shower of dirt and stones rained down from the ceiling above, the house groaning under the strain of its failing foundation. Marlin barked sharply. A warning. Alberto had learned to read those barks now. Marlin wasn't just panicking. He was calculating, trained from years working the mines. The dog had an uncanny sense for structural danger. Time was running out. Alberto reached through the opening. The cold water now rose to his chest as his fingers groped at the rusted chain. It wasn't a complex mechanism. If he could just get it to shift. I'm going to try and pick this, he told her. What's your name? Jessica, she said, her voice steadier now. Jessica Winters. I've been down here for 3 days. The words hit him like a gut punch. Who did this to you? Howard Miller, she said flatly, the man who used to own this house. He said I was his insurance policy ever since he lost his business. Frank's stomach twisted with fury, but his hand stayed focused, working the lock with urgency. Beside her, Marlin stayed firmly in place, offering warmth, support, and just enough pressure to keep her from slipping beneath the churning water. Alberto could hear sirens in the distance. Help was coming, but not fast enough. Click. The lock gave. The chain fell away. Jessica gasped in relief, clutching the ladder. Can you climb toward me? Alberto asked, stretching both arms into the narrow space. She nodded and started moving, awkward and slow, her limbs stiff from confinement, but with Marlin nudging and bracing from below. She ascended the last few rungs and reached Frank's hands. He hauled her into the maintenance alcove. Then another violent tremor shuddered through the walls. Marlin scrambled after them just as a roar of water surged behind, and Alberto turned. We need to move now, he ordered, guiding Jessica toward the crawl space. Her ankle was injured. Every step was painful, but Marlin remained glued to her side, allowed her to lean on his strong frame as they crawled through the narrow tunnel. Alberto went ahead, clearing debris and reaching back to help pull her forward when the passage narrowed. They were just a few feet from a panel leading into the main basement when the worst tremor yet hit. A horrible sound followed, crushing collapse, grinding stone, water roaring behind them as a hidden chamber finally gave way. We're almost there, Alberto shouted, shoving at the panel above. It didn't move. Jessica's eyes filled with panic. Are we trapped? Alberto shoved again. Nothing. Something heavy must have fallen on top of it. Marlin whined low in his throat, then crawled past both of them and planted his shoulders beneath the panel. Alberto understood instantly and joined him, bracing with every bit of strength left in his battered body. They pushed. The panel shifted, just enough for Alberto to see the problem. A toppled shelving unit. One more push. Come on, Marlin, together. With a final heave, the panel lifted just enough for a person to squeeze through. You first, Alberto said, helping Jessica up and boosting her through the gap. Marlin followed, slinking through like a shadow. Alberto was halfway through when the crawl space behind him began to collapse. With a burst of adrenaline, he scrambled out just in time as the access panel and the concrete floor surrounding it fell in on itself. The basement was now waist deep in water, but the staircase still stood. Marlin was already guiding Jessica toward it, her arm draped around his back. They just reached the first step when a gunshot exploded upstairs. It echoed through the house like a thunderclap. Then Clara screamed. Frank's body jolted to life. Exhaustion vanished, replaced by cold, driving fear. He surged past Jessica and Marlin, racing up the stairs 2 at a time, waterlogged clothes dragging behind him. Stay here, he yelled over his shoulder. Marlin didn't listen. He positioned himself protectively in front of Jessica and began nudging her toward the alcove beneath the stairs, ears pinned and eyes locked on the door above. Alberto reached the top and paused. Silence. The storm outside still raged, wind and rain hammering the windows. But the house itself was quiet now. Too quiet. He cracked the basement door and froze. There, standing in the living room entryway, was Howard Miller, gaunt, pale, eyes sunken with desperation. In his hand, a revolver, its barrel pointed directly at Clara, who stood pressed against the wall, shielding Alexis with her body. Eleanor was nowhere in sight. You never should have sold this house, Miller said, his voice disturbingly calm. I had everything set up, then the bank takes it from me, and you people, start digging where you don't belong. Clara, bless her brave soul, kept her voice level. Mr. Miller, whatever you've done, it's over. The police are on their way. Miller gave a dry, humorless laugh. Police can't get through the flooding. That's why I came back now. Figured I had plenty of time. He glanced toward the basement door. Albert tensed. Miller didn't know he was standing just inches away. Frank's only weapon was surprise. Then another thud upstairs. A door slamming. Something falling. Miller's eyes darted upward. Who else is here? Clara's gaze never left her son. Just my mother-in-law. She's elderly. Then let's all all have a little family reunion, Miller sneered. Upstairs. Now, Carlos, Bryant, and Alexis began to move. Frank's mind raced. He had seconds before Miller corralled them, and then it would be too late. That's when the basement door exploded open. Marlin shot forward in a blur of black and tan fur. He launched himself at Miller with terrifying precision, jaws locking onto the man's wrist just as he pulled the trigger. The shot went wild, burying itself harmlessly in the ceiling. Then they crashed to the floor. Albert Todd didn't wait. He sprinted into the room. "Clara, get Alexis upstairs," he shouted. As he reached the chaos, he saw Miller grappling with Marlin, one bloodied arm held down, the other reaching for a heavy lamp. Alberto tackled him full force, knocking the lamp from his hand. They slammed into the coffee table, splinters flying. "Call him off," Miller shrieked, panic overtaken bravado. "Marlin, hold." Alberto barked, using the command Eleanor had taught him. The dog froze, maintaining grip without adding pressure. A perfect tactical restraint. Alberto grabbed the revolver from the floor, tucking it into his waistband. Then he helped Marlin hold Miller down. Movement in the doorway caught his eye. Jessica, leaning against the frame, shivering, wet, alive, and full of fire. "That's him," she said, her voice low but steady. "That's Howard Miller." Another figure appeared on the staircase. Eleanor, calm and composed, a shotgun cradled in her arms like an old friend. "Found this in your closet," she said as she leveled it at Miller. "Hope you don't mind. Figure it might come in handy." Alberto let out a breath. "You have perfect timing." Eleanor's eyes landed on Jessica. "And who might you be, young lady?" "Jessica Winters." Alberto said for her. "Miller had her chained in the basement. She's been there for days." Eleanor's face hardened. "Well, ain't you just the lowest form of pond scum?" Miller tried to speak. "You don't understand. She was insurance. I had debts. They said if I gave them people, I could." "Who's they?" Alberto snapped. "The men I owe. The ones who funded my business. I couldn't pay, so they wanted alternatives." Jessica's voice rose, shaking with rage. "He's been trafficking women. I'm not the first. That chamber? He built it for this." Frank's blood ran cold. The secret room, the restraints, the concealed construction, it was all part of something much darker. "We'll let the police sort this out," Alberto said, jaw clenched. Marlin maintained. Marlin shifted his weight slightly, making Miller yelp, then pounding at the front door. "Police, open up." Despite the storm, the police had made it through. Alberto looked at Jessica, at Carlos, Bryant, and Alexis huddled on the stairs, at Marlin still holding his ground, and for the first time that night, he felt the tide turning.
Eleanor moved swiftly to answer the pounding at the front door, while Alberto and Marlin kept Howard Miller pinned to the floor. What followed unfolded in a blur. Officers storming inside to take Miller into custody, paramedics rushing to tend to Jessica, and a tearful reunion between Alberto and Clara. But through it all, Marlin stayed alert and unwavering, his body planted protectively near Alexis, as if vowing silently that no more harm would come to the boy. As a female officer gently guided Jessica toward a waiting ambulance, the injured young woman stopped beside Marlin. Despite the pain in her ankle, she dropped to one knee and wrapped her arms around the German shepherd's neck. "Thank you," she whispered against his damp fur. "You found me when no one else could." Marlin leaned into her embrace for just a moment, a rare softness flickering across his stoic face. Then he returned to Alexis's side, resuming his silent vigil. With Miller in custody and Jessica en route to the hospital, the Coopers and Eleanor gathered in the kitchen, the only part of the house not submerged or torn apart by chaos. Frank, wrapped in a thermal blanket provided by the medics, sat shivering despite the mug of hot coffee Carlos Bryant placed between his trembling hands. "The doctor says you need to go to the hospital," Carlos Bryant reminded him gently, concern carving deep lines into her face. "You inhaled floodwater, Frank. Contaminated water. It's your lungs." "I'll go," he promised hoarsely, "as soon as we get Alexis someplace safe." Eleanor, quiet since the moment police had arrived, finally spoke. "You're showing the same symptoms Billy had after the mine collapse. Shortness of breath, that wheezing rattle in your chest." He ignored it too, at first. Her words sank like a stone in the room's uneasy silence. Albert understood the implication. He'd read everything about William Target's final days. "It's not the same," Carlos Bryant said quickly, though her voice wavered. Marlin, who had been lying at Alexis's feet, suddenly rose and walked over to Frank. The dog rested his heavy muzzle on Frank's knee. His amber eyes held a strange, knowing depth, as if he'd seen this all before. "I'll go tonight," Albert relented, resting a hand on Marlin's head. "But first, I need to understand why Miller came back tonight, how he knew we were on to him." A detective, still collecting evidence in the living room, stepped forward. "He was watching you," he said. holding up a small object. "We found several of these hidden cameras. This one was in the air vent. He'd been monitoring the house remotely." Carlos Bryant staggered slightly, the color draining from her face. He's been watching us? Watching Alexis?" "I'm afraid so," the detective confirmed grimly. "From what we've pieced together, Miller's construction business tanked last year. To pay off his debts, he got involved in trafficking. This house was one of their way stations. When the bank foreclosed, he sold it but maintained access, kept using the hidden rooms without your knowledge." "But you did save me," Alberto continued, his voice gaining strength. "You saved Clara and Alexis. You found Jessica. You kept us all safe. And now it's my turn to save you." The hours passed in silence, then in soft conversation. Alberto told Marlin about everything, about the house they would rebuild, better and safer than before, about Alexis starting kindergarten soon, about the K9 training center that wanted Marlin to help teach the next generation of heroes. When Frank's voice gave out, he played recordings Carlos Bryant had saved on her phone. Alexis's laughter, the clang of Marlin's bowl at dinner time, the jingle of his leash. Occasionally, Alberto held out Billy Taggart's old blue bandana, Alexis had left it by the bed, and let Marlin breathe in its scent. "He wouldn't want this for you," Alberto murmured, as the first light of dawn crept into the room. "Bill trained you to save lives, not follow him into death. He'd want you to live, Marlin. He'd want you to keep going." That was when Alberto noticed it. A change. Marlin's breathing was no longer ragged. The rhythm had steadied, deepened. The German shepherd's eyes opened again, fully this time, and locked on Frank's. And then the tail moved, not a twitch, not a spasm, but a true wag. Once, twice, 3 times. With a visible effort, Marlin lifted his head and inched it forward, until his muzzle came to rest gently on Frank's knee. Alberto swallowed hard, emotions rising in his chest like a flood. "Good boy," he whispered, tears slipping down his cheeks. "You're the very best boy." An hour later, Carlos Bryant entered the room with Frank's morning medication and froze in the doorway. She didn't speak, only watched. There they were, man and dog, both asleep. Frank's hand rested protectively over Marlin's side. The dog's head still lay on Frank's knee, and beside the water bowl that had gone untouched for days, Carlos Bryant saw something that made her knees weak with relief. The bowl was half empty. "They're going to make it," she whispered, as Eleanor stepped into the room behind her. Eleanor smiled, the lines on her weathered face softening. "Looks like they finally figured it out. They need each other to heal." She placed a gentle hand on Clara's shoulder. Billy would be mighty proud. His Sarge found a new family, a new purpose, and a new soul to save. Carlos Bryant nodded, eyes locked on the gentle rise and fall of 2 chests, one human, one canine. "And Marlin saved him right back," she said softly. "They say loyalty doesn't age, it deepens. And nothing proves that more powerfully than the quiet bond between a man and his dog. It's a connection that transcends words, that reaches into the deepest part of who we are." In Marlin's story, we see more than heroism. We see ourselves, our second chances, our silent battles, the losses that haunt us, and the love that pulls us through. Like Marlin, many of us carry invisible scars from lives fully lived. We remember those we couldn't save. We grieve the moments we couldn't change. And like Marlin, we sometimes forget that we too deserve saving. But healing doesn't come alone. When Alberto realized that Marlin wasn't just grieving Billy, but reliving his death through Frank's illness, he understood something deeper than survival. Sometimes we don't need to be rescued. We need to be believed in. We need someone to stay, to witness our pain until we remember how to live again. Marlin's journey reminds us that the strongest hearts are often the ones that have been broken and rebuilt. And sometimes our greatest purpose isn't to be the hero, but to be there until the one we love finds their way back.